Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 91. The immense doors broke open fully, slowly moving out in a wide arc, no sound marring their silent retreat. Wrought bronze, they stood 30 spans across, each. I stepped out into the sunlight, unbelieving. The sun was high, and everything was right for just that moment in time. I looked down to see enormous steps cut into the very rock, descending in evenly spaced intervals until they reached a great courtyard with blossoming ferns that swayed in splendor. An immense fountain dominated the central section of the square. The square led to a high stone gate. I had seen it before. It separated the inner city from the endless rows of adobe houses that stretched into the horizon beyond it. I stood at the entrance to the great temple. It was not possible. Eve and I had entered this very entrance what seemed like days ago, traveling down, ever down into the blackness of the very bowels of the earth. My mind could not make sense of what I saw. I had escaped the great pressure that had been crushing me to a single point at the bottom of a great hole. There had been a great sense of shifting, rotating, that had made no sense. How could this be? I placed my hands beneath me, making sure the ground upon which I stood was real. It was. There was no give to the heavy cut stone steps. Somehow I had been transported here. I felt a cool hand on my back. Jumping, I turned to see Eve standing next to me, a look of dismay warring on her face with other emotions. For a moment I could see blackness, far deeper than anything I could remember. It seemed to shudder and then pull in on itself. As it did so, the immense doors began to roll back into place, the line of light disappearing, until only a blazing line of fire remained. Then it winked shut. I could feel reverberations, a great sense of twisting space behind the cold bronze doors. My eyes had not shown me any visible image of what transpired, but I felt a great sense of space and movement. Eve breathed out and placed her palm against the giant bronze door. It was cold and silent. Nothing moved for a moment. Then she took a breath, and my eyes brought me to the beauty of her form. I longed to hold her against me, but stood frozen, unsure. I felt a great sadness come over me, like watching the death of a loved one. It pervaded my thoughts and pushed out all other feelings. Meeting Eve's eyes, I saw the source of that sadness. I broke from my immobility and stepped forward, gathering her to my chest. Locked in embrace, I could feel her heart beating against mine. I never wanted to lose that sensation. I clung to it. I would fight with every fiber of my being to keep it close with me. We stood there for a moment. No words passed between us. The anger fell away as if it had never been. The fear, too, the frustration and longing. They all fell away. For a moment there was nothing but warmth and touch. I felt a nostalgia I could not place, a deep sense of loss and a desire to protect, to love this woman. I wanted it all. "You came back to me," Eve whispered softly against my chest. I nodded, not speaking. I had pressed on through the darkness, but I had hesitated. I had not wanted to lose Eve. I would take her with me, if she would come. I knew the reasons why she could not. I knew the reasons why I should understand. But I would not. I would not let go of this feeling. This mixing of two until it became one whole in my mind. I would not give up the warmth so easily. I breathed in the fire of her like a drowning man gasps air. I ran my hand through her hair, feeling the light silken strands caress me. I pushed her lips to mine and I felt them part. I felt the warmth, acceptance, two becoming one. I hoped her heart would hear my request and break free of the words that bound her. I hoped she held the courage to join me, to come away with me. And what could I give her? Nothing, in truth. I did not care. I wanted what I wanted. I felt fiercely for the first time in my life. I felt with the breadth and fullness of an old man who finally sees the purpose of his life just before its end. He sees the time unwinding before him, stretching back to his youth, giving him one chance to follow his blind impulse that he has held for years. Years and years of regret and inaction. I wanted to choose life. Fullness, color, depth. Looking at the top of Eve's head as I held her to my breast, I realized I would make the right choice. Damn the rest. I gripped her to me, a startling intake of breath heralding her movement, and met her luminous amber eyes. They watched me and danced with mischief. Eve stood next to me and breathed in and out against me. There was a contentedness, a sense of hope. I knew what I must do. I had to find Stannon. Turning to Eve, I squeezed her hand lightly. With another step, I moved to the great steps. I felt a tension in the connection between my hand and hers, but after a moment it broke. The two of us took the next step down together. I wondered where my original guide had gone. Inakal, the strange figure in white and gold robes, had left us before we had entered the great temple. I remembered him closing the gigantic doors on us, obscuring all light from view. I shivered. Even the memory of being trapped under the earth brought a moment of terror. Eve's hand rested in mine, and together we skipped down the steps like young children. I saw her smile affectionately at me. I felt radiant. My arms and legs burned with soreness, and a hunger had resurfaced, but it felt wonderful to be back under the hot sun in a familiar sky. A thought occurred to me. Even if we found our way back to human civilization, no one would believe what they saw. Eve's blue complexion and deep amber eyes would create a mob. Her nakedness made me blush, and I considered the implications of travel. We would need to find some way for her to mask her identity to others we may meet. I looked down at my own raggedy clothes and grimaced. Eve, do you have garments you can wear to hide your identity from others? I saw the slope of her form and met her eyes, my face heating anew. Eve pressed herself to me, looking up, her perfect lips twitching into a deep smile. I have traveled once among your people. It was many years ago. But I saw those who were killed or who were made into slaves for allowing themselves to be seen by other humans. It is very dangerous. There is a way. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes turning down, suddenly somber. We will need to summon Inakal. She looked resigned, but then brightened when she smiled gently towards me, seeking out my gaze. She looked earnest. It will be a loss, but I will do it. For you. Her eyes held me like beautiful stars, bursting with emotion. She held my gaze in hers. I must give up part of myself, she said simply. She squeezed my hand and brushed her lips to mine, pulling me in for a tender kiss. She pulled away radiant, sure. I looked down the great stone staircase and saw Inakal's robed figure against the landscape, standing still near the great fountain. He stood with his back to us, unmoving. With each step downward, I wondered what Eve had meant when she said she must give up a part of herself. What was I asking her to do? My thoughts lingered, trying to tease out the secrets behind her words. As we neared the base of the stairway, I saw the golden and white robe capturing the sunlight, shimmering brightly. The true gold crown he wore sparkled like the fairest honey. It looked like it weighed no more than a feather. As we rounded the fountain, I saw the reality. Inakal stood locked in step, frozen in stone. Had I not seen him move earlier, I would have thought him an odd statue that had been dressed with a breathtakingly real robe, patterned in gold mosaics. I slowly touched his arm that protruded from the sleeves of the robe. They were holding a large tome that I had not seen before. The work was incredibly delicate, but what I touched was solid marble, not flesh. Before I could speak, Eve approached, moving past me lightly. She pressed her palm against his stone visage, cupping his face like a dear loved one. Words of power came from her lips, just beneath the edge of my hearing. I could see a startling change happen as an energy flowed into the lifeless statue. I could feel a flow of power being transferred from Eve into the robed statue. Through our linked hands, I could feel life itself leaving her and flowing away. I shouted with all my might, "No!" I felt fear course through me like dark tendrils of ice. "Eve! Please stay with me!" She sagged a little against me, and I could almost see some of the color fall away from her. She felt visibly weaker against me, but she breathed in deeply and rested her head against me, steadying herself. "I will be all right. Just a portion of myself is needed." She breathed wearily against me and gave me a pained smile. Inakal came to life. His narrow shoulders began moving nervously, the twitchy movements I had seen earlier returning again. The robed figure solidly separated me from Eve. There was an inevitability to his movements. Inakal crooned abruptly, facing Eve as she carefully knelt to the ground. The sound that came forth from the robed figure sounded avian and reptilian, mashed together in a nonsensical jumble. It sounded like an echo of what I had heard once before, the sound of silvery chimes just touching the air. Eve went rigid immediately, her eyes opening wide. Her mouth went slack, hanging open as she appeared to be seeing something that was not there, something beyond mortal sight. She placed her arms palm down on the earth to ground her as she struggled mutely against the invisible onslaught. A change began to take place. Her hair roared into a tempest as the long silvery strands whipped about in a gale I could not see or feel. Eve began to shake, her eyes unseeing to the world around her. I could feel a buzzing energy crackle around us. She cried out in huge gasps. I tried to aid her, but Inakal raised his alien voice to a higher pitch and held me back with incredible strength that did not seem possible from his slender frame. Eve bucked and shook further as the unseen power overtook her. Her arms and skin seemed to be bleeding color. Blue rivulets began streaming off her body as she continued to thrash wildly about. She had a look of incredible concentration and focus, pinned on some point far ahead of her. The blue-tinted liquid pooled beneath her sweating body and began to dance in a strange circular pattern on the stone square beneath us. Eve began to hunch in on herself, moving into a fetal position. She huddled there, quaking as tremors ran through her, periodically arching her back in startling gasps. She closed her eyes tight and began to sing a low, wordless song. It had a strange alien sound that pounded at my thoughts. I strained to hear the words, but as Eve continued to sing, her voice got fainter and fainter until she began to weep. Tears of amber gold streamed from her cheeks down to mix with the swirling pool of blue liquid. And electricity pulled static into the air suddenly. I could see long sparks jump from Eve to the ground in radiating waves. They extended farther. One immense burst of electricity jumped to my arm and made me cry out in shock. I backed away as the electrical discharge continued, accelerating. Hundreds of sparks leaped off Eve from every direction around her as she sang out higher, powerful notes into the air. The notes held power and sounded like perfect, clear notes of some forgotten song I had dreamed once, but had disappeared from my mind upon waking. My eyes opened wide, seeing the streaming pools of amber flow off her chin and stop. Eve's hair continued to whip about and began to change. Inakal spoke deeply in a mad reptilian voice that hissed like steam. He took both hands and lifted the true gold crown from his head and placed it on Eve's brow. As he did so, the entire length of her hair streamed off silver drops that became a torrent, flooding to the ground in mere seconds. Her once silver strands were completely without color, translucent. Then the crown began to melt and sink into her flesh. She screamed out a withering song of power, her head flailing to and fro as the honeyed golden crown sank into her perfectly clear strands of hair. The metal moved like a river, flowing into her waist-long mane, and brought out a powerful golden hue that suffused itself permanently. Her hair had the look of beaten gold, mixed with pale white honey. It shimmered in the sun, and I could not keep awe out of my features. Eve hugged herself deeply, singing on clear and true, notes fading into a lulling whisper that floated away on the wind. The strangeness of the words stayed for moments after they had gone, leaving me strange and deeply alive. Inakal stepped away with solemn footsteps that echoed loudly on the stone square. Eve slowly lifted her head from the protective ball she had huddled in earlier. Her eyes opened and my breath caught. Eyes of a cool blue, like a water's depths, looked out at me. There was the faintest glimmer of silver, almost undetectable. She rose in all her splendor and looked radiant, a beaming smile holding me fast to her gaze. She slowly stepped backwards, revealing a swirling maelstrom of deep blue, amber, and silver that spun together faster and faster. Inakal got down on his knees and began to croon a long note. The sound was incredibly old, as if sung from the beak of an enormous bird. Eve stepped forward again and joined her voice to his, adding a haunting harmony as the voices sought out each other's pitch. The harmonic waves rolled over us and felt like a physical field. The strange liquid beneath us whipped up into a frenzy, moving faster and faster. The flowing liquid moved in strange patterns and began to rise from the ground, shifting and shaping itself into increasingly complex compositions. Eve continued her song unabated and stepped towards me, a knowing look on her beautiful face. She smiled encouragingly to me as she continued to sing, linking her hand in mine and tilting her head from me to the writhing, spinning mass between the three of us. I felt a pulse move into me, and the two of them continued their ancient song. I felt it take me in and raise me up. As the harmony washed over me, I closed my eyes and felt the notes of power ebb and flow all around me. I felt calm and peaceful, as if I stood at the very eye of a storm. The harmony felt a surge, and there was something missing. I stood there, eyes closed, unmoving as the symphony continued like wisps of smoke and color, bursting across the sky. I felt an urging, something moving through me, subtle but strong. I opened my eyes, seeing the dancing pillar of light as the crescendo of their voices sounded, tumultuous in my ears. I was swept away and added my own voice to the chaotic cloud of sound. My soft tenor broke and melded with the harmony I felt around me. Surging and powerful, the rising physical storm of liquid held its shape for a moment, then fell to the earth again, folding over and over on itself, increasing its density. The shape spun and whirled, smaller and smaller. The waves of multi-hued liquid pushed together and crystallized, surging and moving one last time, before freezing in the shape of a crescent. The amber formed the outer edge, the blue and silver creating whorls within the depths of the stone. It was no larger than the tip of my smallest finger. Eve picked up the smoking crystal and wrapped a strand of strange metal about it, inserting one end into the tip of the crescent. She held it lovingly in the palm of her hand and looked over to Inakal with a reverence. Then she turned her gaze to me. I wanted to hold her to me. Although her appearance had changed radically, I could see the emotion in her eyes.